This tutorial demonstrates how to launch an EC2 instance with an embedded agent that will dynamically register with control-M environment of your choice and begin processing work. We will build and configure an AMI to achieve this goal. It's assumed you are familiar with control-M and AWS, specifically the AWS console, the AWS CLI, and the EC2 service. The steps in this tutorial are being performed manually, but the intent is for you to take this information and embed it into whichever automation solutions you prefer. The steps that I'll be performing are documented in a text file available in this public S3 bucket on AWS. Let's begin by launching an instance. The instance that we have just launched is based on an Amazon Linux Quick Start machine. Let's hop over to the AWS console and see what's going on with the instance that we have just requested. We can see that it's initializing, but we already have a public IP and public DNS name, so we can start configuring the SSH client we'll be using to connect and work with this new instance. Any SSH client like PuTTY will do. I happen to be using MOBA Xterm. We have now been able to log in as a default user named EC2-user. Let's begin by downloading Node.js installation package, and let's install it. The control-M CLI requires Java 1.8, so let's install that. We can do a bit of cleanup and get rid of Java 1.7 that came pre-installed on the Amazon Linux AMI that we used. Let's pull down the CTM CLI installation package, and let's install it. Now, let's define a control-M endpoint that we will use to provision an agent for this machine. During operation, when the EC2 instance based on this AMI will start up, we will show you how to dynamically find the correct or appropriate control-M environment for this agent to connect to. For the purposes of configuring this AMI, we will set the control-M environment we have just defined as our default. Now let's configure the AWS CLI. Since this is an Amazon image, the AWS CLI is pre-installed, but we need to configure it with our account information so that we can access resources related to our account. First, let's provide the access key. Next, the secret access key. The default region that I use is US West 2, and I use the default output format. We will be using the AWS CLI in an RC script when the EC2 instance we create initializes. So let's make sure that the AWS CLI is properly configured for the root user by copying the configuration we have just created. We are now ready to install the control-M agent. The provision service provides two major components. One is to install an agent, and the second is to set it up or configure it and have it connect to control-M infrastructure. When building the AMI, we will only install the agent. The second portion of configuration will be done when an EC2 instance is launched, and we'll see that in the second part of our tutorial. The agent installation has completed successfully. Let's now pull down a sample RC script, also available in that S3 bucket, and place it into the correct position so that it will execute when the EC2 instance launched on the basis of this AMI will initialize. Let's make sure that it's executable. And because this is a CentOS machine, let's enable this RC script to run when the EC2 instance will initialize. In this demo environment, name resolution is not operating. So I am going to add my Control-M infrastructure to Etsy hosts on all of the EC2 machines that will initialize on the basis of this AMI. This is most likely not going to be necessary in your environment, but you should check with your network and cloud admins to make sure that name resolution will operate between the new EC2 instances that start up and the Control-M environments that you want to connect to. Let's set up the Control-M environment and start this agent so that the proper status indicators will be set in this AMI for all EC2 instances that will then be created using this AMI as a base. That's all that's required to configure this AMI for usage for the Control-M agent instances that we will create. Before we shut down this machine, we can get the instance ID from this machine. And you can also get the same information from the AWS console. I have now moved to another machine I have running, and I will use this machine to create the AMI using the create image function of the AWS CLI. Of course, I can also do this from the AWS console. Let's remember this AMI, and again, it is available in the AWS console, and we can get it easily, but it will be this ID that will then be the basis for the agents that we launch. This is the end of the first part of this tutorial. Please watch the second part to see how we will launch our instances and have them dynamically connect to the environment of our choice.